hope you will. The sources for what I have to say are books by Reich, The People in Trouble, which, if you haven't read, is a must-read. A lecture of his called The Sexual Misery of the Working Masses. And I'll talk more about his work, Democracy, later. But my main source now, why is that all screwed up there? It's weird. What is that? Well, I can try to fix it, but boy, that's odd. That's weird. It doesn't show here. I don't know what that is. Well, in any case, it's Anton Rabenbach's book, The Crisis of Austrian Socialism, but for some reason 2 lines are appearing over one another, and yet it doesn't show it. And wait, computers, love them. Can't live without them. Let me see if I do this. If I hit the space bar. No? Okay, The Crisis of Austrian Socialism, in any case, is the book. And he's also written an article directly about Reich and Reich's politicizing action. The other source for this is a man named Helmut Gruber, Red Vienna, Experiments in Working Class Culture. I know what's going on here. Just give me a second. The wrong document. Here we go. And there's the title. The Crisis of Austrian Socialism, from Red Vienna to Civil War. And this book is an incredible book that I recommend. And then the other one, as I mentioned, is Helmut Gruber's Red Vienna. There's another book, I don't know if Eva Braun, Eve Blau. Not Eva Braun, she was someone else. Eve Blau. The Architecture of Red Vienna, fascinating book. It can't be 1919, that's a mistake. It's 1991. Let me just read a little bit from Anton Rabenbach so you can get a sense of what was going on in Vienna during this period under the Social Democratic government. The socialists created their own public sphere, maintaining active organizations in each of Vienna's 21 districts, which were broken down into sections for electoral work and into house and street associations. Party publications, including the daily Arbeiterzeitung, the daily newspaper, hundreds of Verein, little clubs encompassing all possible free time activities. Party clubs and taverns provided a constant level of activity and support for party members. Thus, in lieu of political power in the Republic, the prospect of directing political and organizational vigor into the construction of a model city in Vienna was extremely attractive to the socialist leadership. In other words, they sort of gave up on changing things politically and decided, let's build this city and make it into a Mecca. And one of the major things they did was to institute a massive public housing projects. And these houses weren't just sort of houses, they were like communities. So you would go inside the massive construction housing thing, and inside there'd be a library, there would be a gymnasium, there would be a school, there would be a cafe, all inside this single building. The entrances and windows of the interiors of the complexes face playgrounds, rest areas, kindergartens, youth facilities, gymnasia, daycare centers, swimming and wading pools, libraries, meeting halls, carpentry shops, clinics, post offices, and cafes. So in each of these housing blocks, and there was also another reason for the housing blocks. They were set up such that every major entrance to downtown Vienna had one of these housing blocks on it, i.e., if it came to civil war, they would make interesting fortresses. When it actually does come to civil war in 1934, a very short-lived war, the Social Democrats are easily routed by the Christian Socialists, and fascism soon follows. So in any case, this idea in Red Vienna of putting their emphasis on work rather than on politics, I think is churning in the background of Wilhelm Reich's mind during this period. The Social Democrats put an emphasis on youth and education, more so than other social democratic parties in Europe, and they attempted to create a new culture, a new cultural perspective in opposition to the classical Viennese culture. And they sought to create what they call the new the new human being. And it's very similar to what they tried in the Soviet Union with the Novy Sovietsky Человек, where the Soviets tried to make this new person. The party started something called, where is it? The Red Falcons, which was sort of like the Boy Scouts for people ages 12 to 16. And then there was a Socialist Workers Youth Group. And Reich ends up most involved with the Socialist Workers Youth. However, when it came to sex education, the Social Democrats were in a reactive mode against charges of sexual licentiousness from the Catholic Christian Socialists. And if you read People in Trouble and some of the other autobiographical work of Reich, you'll see him saying rather derogatory things about Catholics. These Catholics were very conservative politically, very rigid, very anti-sex. And because of that, the Social Democrats constantly were sort of compromising. And as a result, their youth groups were highly puritanical. And this is a quote from Rabenbach. The severe puritanism of many youth movement leaders and the extremely strict social democratic attitudes on alcohol and sexual activity exemplified in the SAJ, the Socialist Workers' Youth, against the sale of alcohol to minors in the early 1920s, as well as the exaggerated efforts of the party to disprove clerical charges of sexual immorality among coeducational youth groups, caused frequent dissatisfaction. So it could be that Reich was drawn to the communists, but certainly into the opposition to the Social Democrats because of its puritanism. Also, Reich had a taste of how these reforms could have been when he went to Moscow. Take abortion as an example. In Austria at the time, abortion was punishable by like 5 years in prison for a doctor who had performed an abortion. When Reich went to Moscow, abortions were completely legal. And he saw this contrast, and indeed, his wife at the time, Annie Pink Reich, and one of his close colleagues, Marie Frischoff-Pappenheim, published a little book called Is Abortion Harmful in 1930. And the very existence of that document caused a stir. I would like to turn now to Reich's, so you have a background here of a country that's fundamentally conservative, but with a capital, and the capital is almost a third of the population of the country. The country is 6 million, the capital is 1.8 million, so it's almost a third of the population, it's over 30%. In the hands of these Social Democrats. However, these Social Democrats aren't all that they're cracked up to be. Let me find my little timeline. Which of these is my timeline? Don't ask any questions. I'll tell you no lies. Here we go. So here is Reich now in this, situated in this context. Reich comes to Vienna in 1918. I'm only picking out key dates in his political life. I'm ignoring all the psychoanalytic stuff at this moment. He comes to Vienna, enters the university. He switches to medicine from law and joins the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society. He's an undergraduate when he does this, and he's probably the first undergraduate to be invited in. And in fact, as early as 1919, he's writing his first paper on psychoanalysis. He gets his medical degree in 1922, but by that time he'd already been a practicing psychoanalyst. In those days, you didn't, get your degree and then do all your, you started. According to Ilse Ohlendorf, he begins studying Marx in 1924. 1927 is a hallmark year. In the beginning of the year, he approaches Freud and asks Freud to become his analyst, and Freud refuses. And at least according to Ohlendorf and others, he falls into a depression and he contracts tuberculosis. And he goes off. Now, you need to know that his brother and father had both died of TB. His brother died, I think, in 24 or 25, and his father had died earlier, perhaps self-induced by wading in the water. You've read that story. If you haven't, you can see this in Passion of Youth. Reich contracts TB, goes off to as sanitarium, and I believe that's the same sanitarium that Thomas Mann was in. I think Magic